And we are live on YouTube. Hello, YouTube.
Hello, YouTube.
We are live on the tube.
All right, let me just wait until I see that in my YouTube feed so I can actually grab the link.
Yeah.
There we go.
I've just had the email to tell me that we've gone live.
It's definitely live. We are there.
Oh, God, Owen's got his kit off. What are you doing, Owen? He just got his nips out. Dude! What are you doing? He's trying to take his jumper off and he's nakified himself. Look at this.
Oh, luckily I haven't got you on the screen.
Sorry about that. Just thought I'd get naked for everyone.
Mate, there's ladies all over the internet now who are flocking to our live stream.
That got a bit awkward.
They've arrived. Yes.
They've arrived just to the point where I'm decided to just get topless for everyone.
Yeah. Ron Muir says, well, this has taken an unusual turn.
This is not what I expected.
I bet he's glad that he tuned in early for that little treat.
Absolutely.
Sorry about that, everyone. That was a slightly tight-fitting top that decided to take my T-shirt with it.
Well, it's a good job it weren't me. Everybody would have left the stream. Right. Gentlemen, are we ready to click the button?
Always.
Right.
Hang on.
Here we go.
Yeah. Yes, I am now.
3, 2, 1, click.
Oh, shit, sorry.
We are rolling. Check.
I did forget to delete my audio test at the beginning.
Okay, everybody stop.
Stop.
Everybody
Sorry,
close that. Let's start a new Audacity one.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Owen, this is for you. So 3, 2, 1, click.
Right, nailed it that time.
Yeah.
Now are we rolling?
Now we're rolling.
Everybody's got audio. We're all good.
We're all good. I
We're
can
all good.
smell and see everyone.
That's worrying.
Okay. Let's do it.
I'll let Owen stop making noises.
Sorry. I'll mute myself. Just have a little tidy up.
Are you good now? He's good now. Right. Hang on. Let me just make sure I've got the actual form up here. Not the form. What am I talking about? The notes. That's what I'm trying to say. The notes. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 63 of the Hop Edition, where we are going to be giving you the lowdown on low ABV beers. So, as always, want to say a massive thank you to our main sponsor, Brewkeg Tap, your first stop for anything brewing, kegging related, and also some nice brewing equipment on there at the moment as well that you might want to go and check out. So, specifically, we have a lovely looking deal on a Brewzilla Generation 4 at £480. So that's a super bundle. That's on the front page of the website. Go and check that out if you're in the market for a new all-in-one system. Hearing a lot of good things about those. And you can also pick up at a discounted price the Firmzilla Gen 3 as well with the ultimate pressure kit. So some good stuff to be had on Brewkeg Tap. Do get over there and check them out. And if you do buy anything, make sure that you tell them that the Hop Edition sent you. And also thank you to all of our Patreons who are contributing to keeping the podcast running and letting us do what we are doing right now. So did we have any new Patreons to name check tonight? Or
we did. We did. They're currently scrolling along the bottom, and I'm going to have to wait for the scroll to come back towards us because I can't actually remember all of their names. However, Carl Coulter is a Patreon. J-Mac, Keith Ball, Stuart Haslam, and obviously we're then back to the legend that is Liam Poole. One thing I do want to say about Brewkeg Tap is if you actually go on there right now, the Gen 4 Brewzilla now has a control panel that comes with it, which means you can actually operate it remotely from your phone. So you can fill everything up, get it set up, connect it to your Wi-Fi network, download the app, and just control it from your phone. And it's also got, also available now is a mash thermometer for it, which drops down into the middle to give you a more accurate temperature reading of your mash.
Nice.
It's really quite cool. There's
That's
some
very
big
cool.
things. There's some big things coming from Kegland soon. As far as other parts of your brewery, can't really say too much about them. You can find them on the internet, but I just know that they're coming pretty soon. Just trust me, they're coming soon.
Stay tuned to Brewkeg Tap for all of those updates and new equipment that's on the way then.
Well, I just snaffled myself one of those Gen 3 Fermzillas with the ultimate pressure.
The ultimate pressure kits.
The ultimate pressure kit. Yeah, I got one of those. And actually, I got a cheeky little 90-degree elbow, 2-inch tri-clamp 90-degree elbow as well.
Ooh.
From Brewkeg.
This month you're really spoiling yourself.
No, I am indeed. So I'm going to get rid of the collection jar. And maybe a case of I could just dump the yeast and just catch it in a kind of bucket or whatever.
Sounds like a sensible idea considering the amount of collection jar sort of explosions and general disasters that you see online with that sort of kit.
And it's in my experience, it can just get quite messy as well. I think dumping yeast generally is not exactly a clean process, but so I picked up one of those and put it together last night. Actually, I'm super pleased with it. It's going to be so much easier to clean. Just in terms of that, it hasn't got that weird little flappy bit inside that catches loads of yeast, and it's just going to be a case of one tri-clamp, whip it off, clean it perfectly. It's gonna be ace. Can't wait.
It sounds like a good mod for that. Anyway, let's move on. So before we get into the low ABV discussion, we are starting off with the return of the hop tester feature. So I have sent the guys out a beer.
Look at the clarity of the labeling, people. Look at this.
The labeling game is strong on that.
I mean, you got a label, to be fair. I literally got. Owen
got Sharpie pen, and
I got Sharpie pen.
I'm not being like disrespectful, Owen, but I'd rather have had Sharpie pen than this fucking abomination.
Label game aside, I've made a couple of changes to the recipe on this, which I'm going to kind of talk about for a minute while these guys have a little sniff and a taste of this beer, because I've also sent them a form. So I'm making this a little bit more what's the word?
Wank,
a little bit more wanky by sending them a Google form that's going to graph out some results for this for aroma and flavor. So I don't want these guys to start giving each other ideas about what they're getting from this beer.
That means we need to shut up, Owen.
Until they've entered some answers onto this form. So it's just a 1 to 10 on various. And by the way, there's a form. The first bit of the form is for aroma. The second bit is for flavor. So just bear that in mind when you fill those out, guys. And that's going to graph that out. But anyway, just going back to the recipe. Like I said, I've made a couple of changes with this this recipe from what I was doing before. I've dropped the Cara malt out of it and replaced it with Cara Gold. I felt like on some of the previous beers that maybe the Cara malt was contributing a little bit more flavor-wise than what I wanted for something that was going to be emphasizing the hops. The hop additions are pretty much the same. So it's 10 grams at 15 and 5 minutes, and then 35 hop stand and 45 in the dry hop. So it's still a 100-gram total, basically. So one packet of hops going in, but trying to get as much flavor out of that from the different stages as possible. And just a little bit of bittering, a separate bittering addition if needed to bring it up to around 35 IBUs. One other change that I've made is I swapped the yeast out from US05 to Laumond Bry 97. Part of my thinking behind that was I wanted a slightly cleaner, like West Coast yeast, because US05, a lot of people talk about it potentially getting a bit peachy or stone fruity. I also thought that it might end up dropping out a bit brighter, but obviously you can see that part of the thinking was not a success. So it might be one of the cloudiest hop tester beers that I've done, actually. So I'm not sure what was going on there. I definitely did put finings into it in the kettle, but it didn't. It's not really drop clear at all for some reason, which is odd because it's not got that much in the way of, dry hopping or whatever in there. So hopefully you guys are getting along with the assessment of the aroma and flavor on this one. How are we doing?
It's like sitting a fucking exam, this.
Can
we just have multiple choice? One, A, B, C, and D.
We should have got you to
everything.
Put like a blindfold on or whatever and turn the lights off so it was proper, sensory deprivation for it.
Put some sexy music on while we're at
it. Yeah. So I've given these guys some categories to rate the beer on in terms of aroma and flavor. And if you've seen the kind of what they called radar graphs before with the different categories on, it's kind of mirroring the typical options you get there. So we've got kind of garlic or oniony flavors, earthy, grassy, floral, citrus, tropical.
It's all about speed with this.
Berry, pine, herbal, and spicy. So kind of covering the majority of descriptors that you would typically see, and obviously just repeating that for the aroma and the flavor on this beer. And once these guys have submitted their results, hopefully it should pop up in a graph, and then we can actually talk a little bit about it and see if you guys have an idea of what hop you think it might be or where it might be from. So how are you doing, Owen? Are you nearly at the end of the form? Owen seems to be taking this very seriously. Look at that face of concentration.
Volume, Owen, volume.
I'm getting there.
That's what she said.
Hello.
I'm just trying to numb the berry flavors to see whether or not I get any more stone fruit.
So the reason that I wanted to try and do this a little bit, obviously blind for these guys is because I know what the hop is. So I'm potentially going to be a little bit biased as far as the flavor assessment based on what I know the descriptors for it are and how I've maybe experienced that hop in different beers before. But you guys are kind of tasting it properly blind in terms of not having any clues for that. But that could also be clues from you talking about it as you're doing the tasting. So hopefully...
Let me know when you finish, mate, because I've got a massive revelatory flavor that I'm getting on this that I'm really quite happy with.
Interesting. Are you done with the form, Owen?
I am on the aroma, mate. Yeah.
Okay. He's still doing flavor.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No. You carry on.
Right. I wish I could just mute Owen so he can't hear what I'm saying because I'm desperate to talk about this.
Well, he's done the aroma.
Hang on. Graham Hughes is wanting to know: is this the hop taster that he's?
It is the hop tester. Yes, Graham.
Send him the fucking form. Give him homework too.
That's a good point, actually.
Graham, you've got homework.
Do you have to choose a number for all of the sections?
Yes.
Otherwise, the form just don't work.
There we go. All right, I'm done.
Okay, you can talk about it now.
Fucking apricot!
Apricot. Okay.
Stone fruit.
On the aroma and the
yeah.
Yeah, I could see where you're coming from there.
What's your main thing?
I'm probably getting more like a berry.
Okay, interesting.
A berry vibe.
I can see where you're going with the berry. I got quite a bit of berry too. But the overwhelming thing for me is just peach. It's just peachy apricotiness.
There you go. You drop out the USO5 to avoid peachy stone fruit flavors, and it's all peach for Chris.
I'm really enjoying this. I am. It's nice. Labeling shit, but the beer's nice.
Labeling is shocking, must admit.
I'm getting like a slightly spicy, slightly piney thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Very mellow though.
Yeah, I think I put pine in there as a relatively noticeable flavor, maybe more than aroma.
That's stone fruit.
That's how I rated it. I said it was more pine on flavour than aroma.
I'm not getting any pine on flavour.
I didn't really rate stone fruit very high. I didn't rate tropical very high.
What about citrus?
Depends if you consider peaches to be tropical, and I do. No. I'm from Doncaster, mate. We barely had fruit.
I wasn't really picking up on the sort of peach thing, to be honest.
I'm getting loads of apricot and loads of peach on the nose. And I'm getting quite a lot of floral, that kind of, meadow kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking this might be either is it Slovakian? Like a Bobecki type of thing. I'm not getting much in the way of spice, but to be fair, I don't get much in the way of spice from most things. I'm getting a little bit of a grassy note, that kind of meadow type thing.
Yeah, I think I put grassy in there. Again, probably more on the flavor than the aroma, but I think that's kind of, piney, grassy. There's a bit of crossover there, isn't there, for flavor-wise?
Very little in the way of, like, garlicky onioniness. Virtually zero.
I got some on the aroma. Yeah, I thought there was some on the aroma.
Okay, so Chris is thinking possibly fruity, sort of European hop.
I'm not getting any lime. Origin. I'm getting very little citrus, so I'm disregarding New Zealand immediately.
Okay. Owen, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking probably US.
Okay.
Just because of the pininess. My guess, if I was to actually get into a single hop, might be Idaho 7.
Okay. Yeah, I can see where you would be going with that.
You kind of expect more citrus, though. I'd expect more citrus.
It's definitely not Idaho 7. It's definitely not a Zaka. If it was a Zaka, it'd be straight up pineapple.
Right, I'll give you a clue. It's actually Australian.
Oh, okay.
Is it that new? It's called Vic Ultimate or whatever it's called.
No.
Is it Nectaron?
No.
Again.
No.
It's just going to start making loads of beers and just sending us Nectaron beers.
Is it Eclipse?
It is Eclipse, yes. So this is Eclipse hops, obviously from Australia, as I've just said. Now, interestingly, both of you have pretty much said it doesn't taste of citrus, but the main descriptor for Eclipse is like tangerine, citrus.
They're on crack. There's no orange in that.
Orangey flavors. Now, as I said, I'm probably a bit biased because I've read that description, so I was like, yeah, I can get a little bit of that on the aroma, but I wasn't as much getting that on the flavor. But I've got a feeling, because obviously I've had Eclipse in a lot of commercial beers where it does express those sort of flavors, that possibly the way it's been used in this recipe has influenced it going a little bit more towards the kind of piney, like resiny notes. And part of that is because being an Australian hop, it's super high alpha, and it's also got a lot of cohumulone in it. So This is 17% AA and something like 40% cohumulone.
That's bonkers.
So I think that maybe to get those sort of more soft, citrusy tangerine notes out of it, you probably would want to remove that stuff from the hot side, even though they're very small additions. But I don't know. I feel like maybe that has kind of tilted the flavor profile a little bit more towards the sort of slightly bitter, piney flavor profile, more so than the soft fruitiness that it's supposed to give you. I still think it's quite nice. I mean, I don't know. Are you enjoying the beer anyway? Or...
Yeah.
It's very nice. Yeah,
it's a festival of apricot.
And I think what I had your other beer you sent me last night, Pathfinder.
Oh yeah.
I noticed head retention's absolutely brilliant, mate. You're absolutely nailing that. I don't know what your secret is, but it's better than mine.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's the special sauce that goes in it.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think
there's no fucking citrus in that. I don't give a shit what anyone says.
This recipe could probably be a lot different if it was like literally just split between hop stand and dry hopping. I'm kind of coming to the conclusion that pretty much anything from Australia, you should just avoid putting it in the boil anywhere. I don't think this hop is like unpleasant in the way that Vic Secret and Galaxy can be if they even touch, the boil. But I think it has changed. It has changed the flavor profile a little bit for me. I don't know. But yeah, so it's Eclipse hops. There we go.
Oh, thanks, Tricky. Thanks for sending it on. I can't say. I think I've probably had one beer with Eclipse hops in. And it wasn't a single hop beer. So difficult for me to really know what Eclipse brings.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
In reality.
But yeah, I mean, I say I've had it in commercial beers, but I've had it in commercial beers that probably had like 2-3 other hops in it.
Yeah.
I know that Jack from Baron was using it quite heavily because he was talking about having a big bag of Eclipse hops that he was throwing into everything. And I'm pretty sure I tried a couple of his beers that had it in, but yeah, I don't think any of them were single hop beers. But anywho,
yeah, definitely a hop I'd like to experiment with more.
Sorry, I was just interacting with our Patreon, with our YouTube audience. Michael Cox has said that he wants the recipe guidelines for my 2.x% beer that drinks like a 4%. So I've told him, stay tuned, bro. I might give you the recipe later.
Well, he's listening to the right episode, isn't he?
I mean, yeah, it's not come on to a duration episode and gone, can I have that recipe? We'll sort you out, Michael. Hang fire, bro. Listen to the entire 4.5 hour podcast. It's golden. I'll send it to you at the end. So I happen to
just before we move on, I have got these graphs now for this. I won't try to screen share because that was a bit of a pain in the ass last time we did that. But
that'd fuck OBS right up.
The spread for aroma is actually pretty even between sort of floral, citrus, tropical, stone fruit is coming out higher, and then berry. So those are all kind of 4 or 5. So it's not really leaning strongly towards any of those, but it's just somewhere across the spectrum between berry, stone fruit, tropical, citrus, floral, and then flavor wise, that's then going pretty similar, but then giving a bit more of the pine and the earthy, grassy results there, as well as the citrus and stone fruit. So yeah, that's what it looks like on the graph. I'll put that graph into the video that I'm going to do for this as well as a follow-up. So anyway, let's get back into the actual topic. What were you saying, Chris?
I have no idea what I was saying.
I've completely thrown you off course now, haven't I?
You have, mate.
Sorry.
You have. Well, what I was gonna say was low ABV beers recently, especially, given the cost of everything, for me they've not become a focus, but they've become an interesting part of brewing. Being able to produce something which drinks pretty good, is up there as far as mouthfeel goes, flavor and all that kind of stuff. It's been an important thing because, number one, it's coming up on the summer. And if I'm out in the back garden, the kids are on a trampoline, I'm doing some gardening, whatever, I don't want to be smashing 8.5% NEPAs down my neck and, falling over on the grass and drowning in my wife's watering of a plant. So I want something that's kind of lower ABV, something that's drinkable for during the summer and all that kind of stuff. And that's basically why I went down the route of trying to produce a low ABV beer that tasted really nice. Now, we've had a bit of a discussion. What is considered by us, the Hop Edition crew, as a low ABV beer? Because I know a lot of people are going to go, 0.5%. Nah, I'm not post-ferment treating my beer. It's just not happening. All right.
Well, I guess we can just clarify. We're definitely talking about like low ABV, as in more table beer type strength, as opposed to no alcohol beers or super low alcohol beers. Because basically, I think if you're trying to achieve that in a homebrew scenario, unless you've got some seriously expensive kit, you're gonna have pretty piss poor results. Because I imagine most people, the only like realistic way of trying to go about that would be to sort of boil off your alcohol or do something similar to that, which I don't think is going to work out great, is it?
Right, yeah. Or just make hop tea.
Yeah.
Fizzy hot water.
I mean, that'd work. You know, that's gonna
there's a whole
shit.
There's a whole thing about that, actually, just making like fizzy, like carbonated water flavored with hops.
Hop water, yeah. Strange.
Yeah. We all need to stay hydrated. So Graham Hughes said my definition of low ABV is somewhere between 7%.
He's not wrong.
So,
not a dipper.
I think realistically, what we're talking about, you know, as a group of brewers, like-minded brewers, is if it's less than 3%, table beer, 2.4 to kind of 3%, maybe 3.2. We're talking that's a lower ABV beer.
I'm going to say 3.3, just so one of the beers I've got here qualifies.
Just so Sonoma fits into it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I'm going to say anything up to about 3.5%. It's probably that's lower than session, really. I think 3.5 to sort of 4.5 is kind of session, right?
Driving beer, that's what you're after.
Yeah. I think the most important thing to remember here is that everybody's interpretation is going to be different. You know, what one person considers to be a low ABV beer might be somebody else's session beer. It might be somebody else's, you know, that's a bit, you know.
Spectrums, overlaps.
Yeah, spectrums, definitely.
But for the purposes of this evening's discussion, we're talking about on and around 3%.
Yeah. Somewhere around about that. And to be fair, a little bit of a backstory. Cheeky Peaks. I don't mind shouting out Cheeky Peaks. They're a good bunch of guys. It's in Australia. It's a homebrew shop. But what they do on their Facebook page is they share a load of recipes. And they shared a recipe for a low ABV saison, which I made about 2 years ago. And it was my first sort of foray into the gnome yeast. And it turned out really well. You know, it's a saison. It's going to have zero fucking body anyway. But it was a really nice beer, and it was very crushable and smashable. So I started producing a couple of lower ABVs. And I think I made like 3.2, 3.4 a few times. And found that they just went down really well. 4 or 5 pints. You're not exactly steaming off your tits. You know, you can still function as a parent if you've had a couple of pints of like 3 and a bit. And that kind of piqued my interest. And then there was a couple of beers that I got from Duration. Their Grisette, their table beer, the Little Hellas. And I'm going to shout out Bates over at Duration because he is producing some bangers. And that's what kind of got me into it. So why low ABV beers? Because we want to be able to drink a few, not get battered, still enjoy a well-made, well-flavored beer. More importantly, to cut calories, because I'm a fat cunt, right? So cut a few calories out, save our livers, and more importantly for me, the scientist of the group, can it be done? Can a home brewer do it? You know, knowing what we know about malts and all that shit, can we do it? And again, it's really gaining popularity over the last few years, alongside a lot of people's interest in the no ABV beers, which, yeah, I get it. Sometimes if you're out your designated driver, you want to have a Beck Zero or whatever it's called, or a Guinness Zero. But, you know, I'd rather have 1 pint of a decent low ABV beer and move on to Pepsi Max, personally.
Yeah, I'm with you. And you know, we shouldn't overlook the fact that we're a bunch of middle-aged home brewers, and you know, we want to drink pretty mild beer these days.
Yeah. We're all parents. We're all getting on a bit.
Sometimes.
Well, actually, I think we get through our fair share of IMPs and double IPAs.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just need something to balance out the IMPs and the double IPAs.
I think in reality, like when you start to get into home brewing, I'll speak to people, and some of our listeners that might only be a year or two into the home brewing thing, and there's this desire to want to brew really big beers, right? And you end up making all these really big beers all the time, and then you kind of learn that actually it takes some real effort to get through a keg of 8% NEPA, and
it can be quite destructive on a school night as well.
Yeah,
I'll just have a couple of these. Oh.
It's just not that social. It's not that social either. Like people come around and you're like, "Oh, what have you got on tap?" And you're like, "Oh yeah, have this," and it's 2 pints, and they're going home
absolutely twisted. Leave the building.
So I think, and then you sort of start to move on, and then you start to realise that actually you want to brew stuff with balance. And it's not to say you don't brew big beers, but that tends to be reasonably occasional. And then generally making beers that are like 4 to 5%. That's the majority of my brewing these days. And actually chuck in some low ABV stuff because I think it's perfect for the summer. And I think it actually balances out the kegs that you've got. You kind of maybe want a 7% Westy, and then you're going to want mostly 4 to 5%, and then sometimes you're going to want like a nice cheeky little 3%er for when you're mowing the lawn.
I think that's true. It's not great when I've had this a couple of times when you sort of accidentally end up with multiple beers that are kind of 6, 7, 8%, on tap at the same time. Just like, oh, how am I ever going to get through, this collection of stuff? And I found if that is, sometimes that's the case, you tend to be keeping hold of those beers for longer than you really want to as well. They're not, usually going to go past their peak before you finish them off. So, I definitely like to have something that's at least sub 4% on tap.
Mr. Sonoma says I like something that's sub 4%. Gee, what a shocker! It's one of those things.
It can be Sonoma. It can be other things.
I think the most important thing to remember here is we have lives that continue. We don't just sit and drink beer all day. There are some members, some people who do. And that's fine. If you want to just drink 15 pints a day, crack on. But having 2 or 3 pints when you're cooking on the barbecue in the summer, in the hot weather, or even just chilling out watching TV, it's nice to nurse a pint for an hour and a half, but I'd rather have 2 pints in that time, Keep it cold, keep it going. It's an important thing to remember.
Especially when it's hot. Yeah, you don't really want something that's going to just end up warm. So what like we've all started to sort of brew some low ABV beers, but what style of beers have we opted to brew?
I mean, all the ones that I've done have generally been, sort of Sonoma-ish style, kind of hoppy type table beers, I guess. I don't think any of the bitters that I've made have really ventured close to, less than 3.5%, but certainly a few that have been sub 4%, maybe. But it's mainly been sort of things in the kind of, again, surprise, surprise, sort of track low ABV sort of style of brewing for me personally. But I am very keen on having a go at doing some grisette sort of style brewing, which is going to be a slightly different approach to it because of the nature of those beers and those having a more saison-like profile where it's going to be quite dry. So there's definitely going to be more than one way to skin a cat as far as this idea of low ABV brewing goes, because there's still obviously a lot of variation between styles when you're aiming at that lower ABV rate. Some might be quite dry, some you might be aiming for a really high finishing gravity to keep more body in. Things like your hoppy table beers, that will definitely be the case, I think. Whereas others, you're going to be using a attenuative yeast like a saison yeast, and it's still going to end up dropping very low. So, I
agree with that. I think one of the things that I'd just like to point out, and I've just been reminded of this by one of the members of our little brewing chat, is Michael. You know, if you become a Patreon of the podcast, you get access to our Discord server where you get all the recipes that you want whenever you want them. Just throwing that one out there. Just saying, you know. Let's get into what it actually takes to make a beer, because we can sit here and talk about the overview as much as we want, but reality is these people want details.
Let's get down to the hard facts.
Let's fucking do it. So, ingredients. We've broken this down into multiple sections because we thought about this shit, right? So if we go into the ingredients section, first thing that you're always going to prepare is your water. All right. So if you're preparing your water, my personal opinion, and some people may differ from this one, is I tend to go for whatever is right for the style that I've chosen. However, in order to give the impression of more body, because it's very easy with a low ABV beer to just lose that body and for it to drink like water and for it to not be very pleasant on the old mouthfeel, generally bump that chloride up. Because if you bump your chloride up, and this will come in later on because there's a secondary part to this which I don't want to touch now because it fits in better later on. Bump your chloride up and it'll give you a little bit more body. You also, for me, and I don't know about these guys, I know Owen's brewed a low ABV. I try and keep the sulfate a little bit lower because controlling your IBUs is incredibly important. We'll come on to this again later. But for water profile, for me, definitely bump that chloride up a few points from where you normally would put it. Try and get your chloride to sulfate ratio. For me, I tend to go around 3.5 to 1 chloride to sulfate. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think that would certainly be, again, because of the type of beers that I do that are in this kind of ABV bracket, that would definitely be the approach I would use. I think you mentioned this later on in the notes as well, but some of that chloride can come from...
No, don't say it. Don't say it.
Another mineral, which will remain nameless at this point.
Another source.
But speaking of high chloride, it's not a not a low ABV beer that you've got there, Chris, but that has got a lot of chloride in it, that's for sure.
It's low enough.
Yeah,
I think it probably goes without saying that this is probably going to be a somewhat of a tough style if you don't have a really good handle on your water profiling. So if you don't have RO water, if you don't have an RO water system or have access to RO water and know how to treat your water to be able to build a specific water profile, this could be a tricky style to make. And I think the water profile is particularly important. As Chris pointed out, too much sulfite in there is probably going to cause some problems downstream. I think you probably want to bump your chloride up. You probably could, depending on your sort of water source. If you do have quite soft water, you could probably get away with just a tablespoon of chloride.
A tablespoon, half kilo,
or whatever. But yeah, I would say, do your research on water chemistry. Check out our podcasts. Water chemistry.
Yeah, that'd be a good one if you suffer from insomnia or have a dog that requires million miles of walking.
I mean, we go into that the kind of sulfate versus chloride stuff in a lot more depth on that podcast, that's for sure. But I think just talking about the sulfate specifically, trying to keep that down a bit. It has a drying effect, and when people talk about it being beneficial for sort of certain hoppy beers, that's usually more to make the kind of expression of, I guess, hop bitterness in the case like West Coast styles, more sharp or kind of biting, I guess, or a crisper taste to it. So it's not necessarily the type of hop expression that you're going to want in a low ABV beer, because that could very easily become overwhelming, and that drying effect is also going to potentially make it taste quite thin. So I think just to give a little bit more detail on why leaning much more towards the chloride is probably a better idea. In the majority of cases, right?
I think you probably don't want to go mad though. I think the sulfate, to your point, Triggy, is kind of like sulfate can have the added benefit of making kind of hops pop a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Too much chloride may just kind of round it out to the point that it becomes just a bit flabby. So I'd say, Chris's recommendation of the sort of 3 to 1
Yeah.
3.5 to 1 ratio is probably a pretty happy place. Although I wouldn't totally ignore the sulfate. I think you probably want a certain degree in there, like, maybe 20 to 30 parts per million. Do you reckon that's a probably fair kind of working point?
I think I ended up with well, why didn't I just open brew? Well, I can't open brew father because my fucking BC will shit itself. 40 fucking windows open yet again. I'm fairly sure I ended up with around about it was 90 parts calcium, and I think I ended up it was about 27 or 26 sulfate is where I ended up with version 6, which is the recipe I'm going to be sharing with everybody at the end of this podcast. It was one of the things that I tweaked as I went through the actual development process that I went through with the low ABV beer, because I'm going to get loads of shit off of certain people from our little group. Richie Brooks reckons I'm on version 89. He's fucking wrong. I'm on version 7. But I'm a scientist, so that's kind of how I work. You can take the piss out of me as much as you want. You've got to develop these things in a logical way. But I'm fairly sure it was 3.5 to 1 I ended up at. It was somewhere around about that. And that seemed to work for my palate and for the way that sort of I was making the beer and with the malts I was using. Because don't forget, different malts with the level of kilning that they're going to have and the batches of barley and how much wheat and how much oats and all the other bits and bobs that come into it, they're going to affect your sort of residual elements or your molecular sort of profile within your water profile as well. So there we go. The shit has already started. Look, I'm going to pull this one up on screen. Richie, bro, it was 89 last week. It's 189. It's actually version 412, Brooksy. So fuck off.
In your face. Shut your pie, old Brooksy.
I'm brewing 18 a day.
Thomas, one of our listeners on the chat, has just asked about what about calcium. So I think broadly calcium is just good for yeast health. So you're going to want some level of calcium in there. I think as long as you keep it below around, I'd say 100 parts per million, you probably want sort of 50 to 100. I think you're probably pretty safe place.
Yeah, anything more than 100, you might end up with a metallic taste, and we don't want that. So that I kept mine below 90.
Or the sort of paracetamol type.
And nobody wants that powderiness.
No, so try and keep your calcium a little lower than 100 parts per million, but yeah, you want some level in there for your yeast health.
The rest of it is just keep your yeast nice and healthy, get some magnesium in there if you can, look after it, because even though the yeast aren't going to be working particularly hard, your starting gravity is not going to be much more than about 1032, 1033. Just keep an eye on the fact that you do still need yeast, all right? You're not just making wort and then carbonating it, all right? You do need some alcohol in there.
There is a slightly added benefit to making low ABVs and beers, and so much as you use hardly any malt.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cheap. And you use like very little yeast, so you can get away with like one packet of like dried yeast, or like, you start as like 1.1 liter or something like that.
Yeah, you've got to remember, based on Tricky, because he's got a video for this.
Always.
You can actually pitch direct into a low ABV batch a Y yeast smack pack.
Oh, nice.
And it still ferments out fine.
That's one of the few occasions when that will be successful.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't need to do you don't really need to do a start, especially if you're using like an omega yeast.
Well, I say that if it's anywhere near its like best before date, you probably still need to make a starter. But it's relatively fresh.
I would recommend certain omega yeasts and certain Lalmand yeasts actually for these beers. I've worked with a couple of each, and those were the ones that for me ended up being spot on. Again, I can't open brew father, so I can't give you names.
I think you generally want yeasts that are gonna, not just sort of have that kind of fuller flavor profile, but also quite responsive to mashing temperature as well, because there are differences in how, and we're obviously going to talk a bit about mash temp later on, but your yeast want to be responsive to higher mash temps rather than, certain yeasts are just going to attenuate really heavily, kind of almost regardless of where you mash at.
Don't use Voss.
Voss, I'm looking at you. Yeah.
Don't use Voss. Avoid Quake.
Yeah, exactly.
Or an STA1.
Yeah, anything that's STA1 positive, don't bother.
I generally find that the more traditional kind of English ale yeast strains are the ones that will actually give you that nice wide sort of variation as far as final gravity when you're playing around with mash temp, and to quite a dramatic extent in some cases, which is obviously useful for this kind of brewing.
And play well with your malt and your hops.
Yes, and will often contribute the fruity esters as well, so it's bringing an extra.
So if we can just take the next step on the notes and move on to the malt choices. Now, I can only speak from my personal experience, okay? I use Pilsner and Vienna because I love the flavor profile that Pilsner gives, and I love the profile that Vienna gives. I've also used a very small amount of Golden Promise, which I stole off Alan around the corner. And there are certain heritage malts that you can get these days which would play well. I've not used them, but they would play well. Essentially, because of the nature of the beer that you're making, the low amount of malt that you're going to have, you need something with flavor. All right. So don't just be using a standard pale malt. Don't be using a standard lager malt. Use something which has got a bit of flavor, something which is going to leave something in as a base malt, and go with that, because these beers are about flavor. If you want bland shit, drink fucking Carling. All right. If you want something which is craft made, which is, good, stick with something which has got a bit of flavor.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I just used crisped extra pale malt in mine as the base malt. I think it's very dependent on the style of beer that you're trying to make. So, that's why I kind of prompted you guys to talk a bit about the styles of beer that you've made. And I think in reality, you can probably make a low ABV version of almost any beer style, other than maybe like an MP or a barley wine. I think you'd struggle to make a low ABV version of either of those. But
isn't a low ABV impy just called a stout?
Yes, it's just called I mean, could you make a decent stout at 3%?
Guinness do.
They don't, do they?
They used to. You can actually make a really good stout at low ABV if you mash high enough.
Yeah. So I think it's very dependent on the style you're making, and I guess malt choices are going to be dependent on that. Marisotto could probably work well as base malt if you were making more of an English style
pale
beer or pale, whatever.
Yeah, you can. Genuinely, yeah. I'm just going to be typing to Michael because he wants to know how to use Disco. So
yeah, no worries.
I'm gonna send him some message. You guys just talk.
Yeah. Okay. So what else are we putting in the malt, Tricky?
Well, I think we've got carapils mentioned on the notes there, and I think sort of those lighter coloured kind of caramel or crystal malts can be quite useful as far as the low ABV beers go generally. They're going to contribute some of those kind of unfermentable dextrins into the beer, which is one of the reasons carapils is also known as dextrin malt, because it contributes unfermentable kind of dextrins into the beer. So you can kind of go quite heavy with those. I mean, I think I would definitely, unless you want them in there for a particular style, I think you definitely want to avoid anything that's sort of going much beyond about 20 EBC as far as the color goes. So I'd be thinking like carapils, caragold, carahell, the lightest kind of crystal malts that you can get, but you can probably push the quantity of those that you're putting in a bit beyond what you would normally do, just to help build that body in the beer again, give you more unfermentable sugars. And the sweetness that it's going to contribute as well is obviously just going to help to give you a bit more malt flavor rather than it being quite thin and watery, which it can obviously cause you a problem. So yeah, in the beers that I've done at the lower ABV, I tend to be looking at sort of, probably starting around maybe 8%, but sometimes going quite a bit beyond that. So up towards, maybe even 12-15% for those really light kind of crystal malts. And you'll see some commercial recipes where it's even more than that. And they're really kind of pushing it to try and just beef up the residual, sugars in there as well, which is going to be another thing that's going to contribute to the higher finishing gravity, which is obviously something that a lot of the stuff we're talking about is going to be tying into trying to just push that final gravity up, so you can start with not a higher original gravity, but a relatively high original gravity, and still have a low finishing ABV. So you're kind of keeping body in there as much as possible.
I'd also like to jump in here, Tricky, and I don't know if you've been covering this because my keyboard's really loud. The one good way to introduce extra flavor into a lower ABV beer is to blend those crystals. So you can put a smaller amount of the darker ones in, and maybe a bit more of the lower color ones in. And again, it's going to give you the residual sugars, as you just said, but it's also going to contribute to the overall flavor of the beer.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no reason why you can't. I mean, a bitter, an ordinary bitter, is between, I think it's 2.9 and 3.2. I might be missing that, but I think it's around about that range. And again, a blend of the crystals will give you that flavor and give you that drinkability with a lower ABV beer, and like Tricky said, contribute to that higher final gravity.
That's it. Well, I think we've dived into the detail, as you said, Chris. People want details, but I think let's just take it up a level and talk about, if you're constructing a low ABV beer, what are the principal elements you're looking for in order to achieve a good outcome. So one of them, Tricky, was just talking about body, right? So we've been talking about water profile to build body. We've been talking about malt choices to build body. We've been talking about not using too many hops, hot side in terms of IBUs, which we'll get onto for very good reason. So body really is the major driver here, isn't it?
Absolutely.
In terms of, especially if you're making a hoppy style beer.
Yeah, 100%.
Because the last thing you want is a hop tea.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to have hoppy water with a sprinkling of malt flavor.
That's the major pitfall for anything in this sort of really low range of ABV, is just thin, lacking body, quite watery on the palate, and then as a side effect of that, the hops just becoming unpleasant and quite dominant as far as bitterness and the balance of the beer as well. So yeah, most of what we're talking about is kind of about trying to counteract that, essentially, isn't it? I think
that's it. It's about how do you create a beer that has very little alcohol, which it's important to remember that the alcohol in itself adds body, I think, doesn't it? The perception of body, and it adds a certain level of sweetness as well. So you're looking for residual sweetness. The residual sweetness will bring body to the beer. I don't expect that this is going to drink like a 8% NEPA that you can't see through.
That would be difficult.
Right. But at least you want a beer to hold its own, in a sense, that you drink it and don't go, oh God, that's just unpleasant because it's like a glass of water that tastes a bit weird. So largely your malt choices are going to be about how do I create complexity, but equally adding body. Tricky was talking about carapils. As dextrin malt, chip malt is another good option, which is not as kilned as carapils, so that will add dextrins as well. But of course, then you've got your adjuncts to play with as well, which of course is all about body.
Essentially, at this point, what you're doing is, once you've got the colour where you want it, you've built as much body as you can using your colouring malts, your crystals, your flavour malts, whatever you want to call them. Then you move on to essentially building a NEPA. You do. I mean, I've thought about this a lot. Essentially, you're just building a miniature fucking NEPA. So we're talking wheat malt, flaked wheat, oats, golden naked oats. You're talking malted oats. You're talking all of these ones that give you a residual sugar content or unfermentables content. That's what you're looking at.
Some of those kind of haze contributing adjuncts as well is going to, haze is not like devoid of flavor. That's going to actually give it a different mouthfeel and body as well. So, that going down that sort of like hazy route as far as adding a big quantity of sort of wheats and particularly like flaked wheats and oats and things like that is gonna help there as well. I think certainly for mouthfeel and stuff like that as well.
Definitely, yeah. This is essentially where you've built the basis. You've got your flavor in there from your bits and bats, and then all of a sudden it's like, right, let's see how much body we can build, and that's where you move to. And again, like I say, Owen was talking about chip malt. I've not used it personally, but I know that Owen has, and I know for a fact that he's got a low ABV beer on tap, and I know for a fact that he's smashing it like his bride on a wedding night. And I think it's one of those things where you're like, you've got to put some thought into this, and I try to. Whether I hit the fucking target first off, don't really matter. But eventually we're going to get there, and dragging in some of the basic principles of adjuncts for a NEPA will help you building a lower ABV beer as far as that mouthfeel and that body goes.
So something we haven't got listed there, which we should probably mention at this point, is also things like maltodextrin as a possible.
You can
addition.
do that, yeah.
Little bit of a sort of cheat mode for adding in that that extra sort of body and pushing the FG up. Definitely have seen that in some examples of commercial recipes, I think, for sort of table beers and things like that. I'm pretty sure I've got a recipe for the Colonel's table beer that's got maltodextrin in it.
Doesn't really help with your waistline, that one, though.
No, it's not going to help keep the calorie content down on it, but pretty sure they put that in the some of the track table beers as well. Possibly, I might be wrong on that one, but
probably do.
I mean, you probably wouldn't want to be using lactose, would you? But maltodextrin is an option. Although, if you wanted to do a milkshake table beer, I guess you could.
Fuck off, Tricky! Right, kick him
that
out.
That was a tongue-in-cheek suggestion.
Yeah, I'm glad it is. I'm glad you followed up quickly on that.
I would not ever actually do that. Just to clarify.
That would be weird.
Don't talk to me about milkshake beers. That should just have never happened.
Can we move away from malt now? Because I think we've covered it. Can we please cover hops and the fucking pinnacle of what is going to fuck up your low ABV beer if you even remotely get this wrong? Right.
Yes.
I fucked up version 3 of my low ABV beer so badly that it was undrinkable. Now, I have some friends who come round to drink beer with me, and these guys would pretty much drink fermented toilet water if you put enough hops in it, right? I know they'll listen to the podcast, right? Jason, Mikey, Phil, you boys have no fucking taste buds, all right? All three of you smoke more Berkeley fucking cigarettes than almost everyone else on earth. I know they're listening.
Hey, so free beer is free beer, though. Especially
free beer is free beer.
Especially up in Yorkshire. I mean, fucking hell.
Absolutely. However, right, these boys, when it came to version 3, went, nope. Jason, in fact, tried to throw the pint glass at me with beer still in it, which I thought was harsh because I'd given him my prized. I'd given him this one, right, which is my Track Brewing Co. beer glass. And he tried to throw it at me, which I thought was incredibly fucking harsh. Okay? And then I tasted the beer and realized he was right. if you fuck up your Bugu ratio on a low ABV beer, it will be horrific. Okay? IBUs with a low ABV beer are, aside from body, the single most important part of brewing this beer. Because what is important in everything in life and in brewing? Balance. You fucked this one up, you fucked your beer. Okay? Just be very, very careful with your IBUs. Find a Bugu ratio that you're happy with and stick to it. No fucking, ad hoc in it on the brew day. No, I've got 8 grams left. I'm going to throw it in anyway. Don't do any of that shit. Develop a recipe and fucking stick to it.
I think it goes without saying that measurement is key in making this style as well. In so much as when you're measuring your malt, don't get slapdash with it. When you're measuring your hops, as Chris said, don't just lob in that extra 8 grams. Be super precise with everything, because otherwise you will just kind of really start to fall out of range and everything, and it would just end up being a mess. And you don't have a lot of residual sugar to play with, so the range in which is happy is the tolerances of everything is just a lot tighter. So I was chatting to a friend earlier and I said, I've made a low ABV beer, and he said, is that like difficult to do? And I was like, well, actually, yeah, and it's a technical brewing challenge. I think it's probably as technical as making, maybe not as technical as making like a big impy, but certainly as technical as making a lot of more difficult beers, I would say. Would you agree?
I would more than agree with that.
Yeah, 100%.
And I would say making a low ABV beer well is as difficult as making an impy well. There's so many steps you can fuck up on. And your Boo to Goo ratio, when it comes, so bitterness to residual sort of gravity units, is just as important when you're going for that massive beer, because if your IBUs aren't high enough, it's going to be an insipid sweet mess. Whereas if your bitterness units are too high or out of a range with a low ABV beer, it's going to be just this hideous, bitter, teeth melting mess. Balance is everything in life, and unfortunately with the lower ABV and with the higher ABV, you have a specific range that your palate is accustomed to, and you need to stay within that.
I'd say with the lower ABVs that probably your sort of margin for error is a bit narrower, like with hitting that balance kind of thing. It's the bigger beers, I mean, I've certainly found that I will have missed, my numbers a bit on bigger beers, and it's not like, ruined the balance of the beer unless it's gone, massively out of the parameters that I was looking for. Whereas I think with a low ABV beer, an extra 5 or, so IBUs or whatever could quite easily make it way out of balance towards the bitterness. Or if you, just hitting the low ABV, like you can easily fuck that up by, being a little bit over with your, certainly something I've found in the past with the lower gravity beers, because you are sparging with more water, it's quite easy to actually end up with a higher efficiency on there, and you can overshoot your actual gravity quite easily with those as well, which is something to bear in mind. So I think it's probably, like, for my take on it would be, it's actually probably a little bit easier to like cock up a low gravity brew than it is some of the higher ones, certainly as far as like the balance and stuff and getting that bang on and hitting your numbers and all that kind of stuff.
Tricky, I want to make sure, because you're the one who's going to do the editing and the upload, I want the tagline of this podcast on the audio version to be, this is a technical brewing challenge. I want that to be the name of this podcast, because that's a fucking brilliant line, Owen. It is. Technically, this is difficult. You have to be bang on, know that you're going to get a higher efficiency and therefore reduce the amount of malt. You have to know that things are going to be different. So you have to really refine your. I went through 7 versions before I ended up with one that I was really happy with. Well, 6 really. 7's just a hop change on number 6, but you've got to make sure that you're right. And one of the things that we've got down here is residual bitterness from the hops. So if you do a huge dry hop, right, which, let's face it, we all like to do 100, 150, 200 gram dry hops, all right? We love the flavor of hops. The reason why this podcast is called the Hop Edition is because we love hops, okay? Now, if you have too much of that hop burn, that residual bitterness, if you're not quite exact when you cold crash down before you dry hop, if your temperature control in your fermentation area is not bang on, you can end up with more residual bitterness from that. And that can really throw your beer out as well.
I'm with you, Chris. Yeah, it's definitely a technical challenge. And I would say that you, before embarking on this challenge, I would challenge yourself to say, how well do I know my system?
Yes.
How consistent are my results? And if you don't feel like you've got that consistency, I would perhaps suggest practice before you try and take on a low ABV beer. So it's very, very real risk. You're just going to overshoot it and you're going to end up with a beer that's not low ABV or yada, yada, yada. Just what we talked about. So back to hops.
Well, just to carry on that point, one thing that I did find when I was brewing these low ABV beers, specifically with my all-in-one system that I've built, I found that my efficiency was roughly 4% higher when doing these beers, and I could actually tone it back. I could drop my malt even further, knowing that I was going to get a higher efficiency from it. And just that tiny little bit of tuning dropped me from 2.9% to 2.6%. And that was really good for me because I wanted to brew 2.4, 2.5 was kind of, I'd be happy with 2.5, but 2.4 was where I was aiming.
Do you think there's a limit though, Chris? Do you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, where's the sweet spot? Because you've clearly done a lot more of this brewing than Tricky and I probably have.
2.8. 2.8 is dead easy to hit on my system. It's like I can hit 2.8 every fucking day of the week. And I can get it bang on.
2.8 to probably what, 3.2 is probably about the kind of.
We're talking sweet spot. Yeah. 2.8 to 3.2. You should be able to get 2.8 to 3.2 pretty much every day of the week and twice on Sunday if you know your kit, if you've dialed it in, if you've spent that one day when you thought, I can't really be fucked to brew, just working everything out, doing all your numbers, calculating your efficiency. If I sparge this, how many times have I stirred it? Is my pH bang on? Do I have my water additions weighed out right? Are my hops bang on the numbers? Am I fucking just throwing in a handful instead of like weighing shit out? Am I American and using cups as a measurement? All of this sort of stuff, right, will really affect everything. There's a reason why we have fucking grams in the UK and Europe, America, right? Because I'm not being funny, ounces of shit. Okay? So just that it all comes down to technical control. All right? It comes down to knowing your shit and controlling everything. Now, I could go on that rant for hours, but one thing that I do want to say, and one thing that I've said to both Owen and to Andy, who unfortunately can't be with us because he is as crook as fuck, there comes a point where if you are banging a load of hops into your beer, one thing that multiple people, multiple guests on this podcast have said to us, in order to remove that residual bitterness, to kind of lower it down a little bit, to soften the beer, is an extra salt addition. I found that these beers from version 3 onwards that I did all benefited from 0.5 gram of salt thrown into the boil kettle. It just nullifies that bitterness that you're going to get. It's not going to give you a salty beer. You've got 23 liters to put it. I put fucking 0.5 gram on a steak when I'm cooking it, right? Put that extra bit of salt in, it will counteract the hop burn and it will make the beer drinkable earlier, but it will also reduce that bitterness down to a level where it is comfortable.
It's going to give you a benefit of extra mouthfeel as well, isn't it?
And flavour.
It's literally seasoning in the same way as it is for the for food. So as with all water additions, really.
Just to be clear, don't put pepper as well.
Don't do that.
Maybe not the pepper.
No Worcestershire sauce either.
Well, unless it's a saison that you think is lacking on the spice front, maybe you can pep it up a little bit that way.
Yeah, a little pep.
So
also, there's a mandatory approach to adding the salt during the boil, and that is where you have to do the salt bay. You have to run it down your forearm. Otherwise, it's not worth doing.
I take that to the extreme. And when we were down in Southampton and I was cooking the burgers, I was giving it that every time I did it. It drags some of those extra skin oils in, which adds flavour to everything.
Yeah, nice.
That's what it is.
Yeah, I know. I really noticed the piquant flavour of Chris's arm oils.
That's what it was
in that burger.
Yeah. They were good.
It made
burgers,
all the difference.
They
were good burgers
and nutty.
Yeah.
So just talking a bit about and just to reiterate your point around adding some salt during the boil, I think that's a great shout, Chris. But just talk a bit more about hops, because really we only just talked about IBUs. But if you are going to be dry hopping a beer, so if you're making a hoppy style, make sure that you do, take process steps to avoid hop burn. So try and dry hop cooler. Maybe consider using a different hop product, like maybe Spectrum in the Whirlpool, or using Looper Max or Cryo or whatever in the dry hop, which is just going to help to keep that bit of vegetable matter from the beer, as well as potentially avoid hop burn, because that will probably ruin the beer as well, and it will be accentuated. It's not going to be hiding behind a lot of sweetness.
Yeah. Having just done a beer with Spectrum and Incognito in it, it's not really relevant as far as low ABV goes, because this one was 6.8%. But as far as the discussion of reducing vegetal material in there, this beer was like drinkable pretty much straight out the FV, and considering the amount of the hopping rate, even though it was Incognito and Spectrum in there, there was just like no hop burn or greenness to it at all. So I was literally drinking after the keg was brimmed, the dregs from the FV were still tasting fantastic and not green at all. So that's definitely something that could be useful, I think, in a low ABV beer as well. Again, because any trace of that sort of flavor is quite easily going to potentially overpower it as well if it's not necessarily got all the malt flavors for it to build upon too.
Just to jump in on that point, very, very good point, Tricky. These new products that are out on the market will have an effect of basically reducing the green shit that's in your beer. The one thing that I would say about low ABV beers, and one thing that I implemented from version 2, was an extended cold crash. And try and transfer that beer when it's really fucking cold. Like, I try to transfer my beers at 1 degree, because it really just keep that green shit right at the bottom, stuck in with your yeast. You transfer the beer off. And I also cut my transfer off probably 1.5 liters earlier than I would if it was any other beer. Because you do not want that green layer coming. Your first 2 pints out of a keg, everybody knows you're basically going to chuck them anyway. But what you want is that green shit stuck to the bottom. You don't want the floating. Don't transfer if it's a fucking lava lamp, all right? Just drop it down, get it nice and clear, and transfer it through, and maybe leave just a little bit more. Just fill your keg up to 18.5, 19 litres, whatever it is you're doing, rather than trying to take that last 3 litres and kind of risk getting a gob full of essentially hop puree. Just be careful with these beers.
Yum.
Technical challenge, right? We're going to stick with technical challenge because it really fucking is. But to move on, also, actually, no, before we move on, hop choices, okay? You will get flavors out of hops with a low ABV beer that you do not get out of hops with a high ABV beer. Personal experience, trust me. Some of the hops that you would think, oh shit, I can't dry hop with that. You fucking well can. All right? Trust me. Some hops that you will not dry hop with normally, you can do with low ABV, and is that what is that?
That's Andy's beer.
You've got an Andy's beer.
Yeah.
Which one?
You're right today. Low ABV one. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, to be fair, I thought I had that. Oh, are we doing that one for the commercial? Are we doing?
Well, I was thinking of doing that one.
Yeah.
Let's test Andy's beer anyway. Finish your point, Chris.
I just have.
No, fair dues.
Right. I'm going to give Andy the track goblet glass.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
So, I think we briefly talked about cohumulone earlier when we were doing the hop tester, and that might be something to consider with lower ABV beers as well, as those high cohumulone hops.
Yeah.
Again, that might be more noticeable in a lower ABV beer with less malt sweetness to counteract a potentially harsh or astringent bitterness that you can sometimes get from those sorts of things. So coming back to Australian type hops, Galaxy and Vic Secret and things like that in the boil definitely wouldn't be my first choice. It wouldn't be my first choice generally anyway, but especially not in a lower ABV beer where any kind of rasping bitterness is going to be much more apparent, I think. So yeah. And possibly just looking more towards later hop additions as well. Again, some beers you might want to have a simple sort of bittering addition, but I don't know, certainly a lot of the beers that I've done in this kind of strength range have been much more focused on whirlpool and dry hopping sort of methods.
I tend to not add anything with these kind of beers until about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I may do a very small 3 or 4 gram first wort hop, but I will not. I don't do a 60-minute.
Well, you're going to need a pretty low IBU total to get the sort of, even if you're going for a fairly high Bugu ratio, because your gravity is going to be lower as well. So quite often, especially if it's a hoppy beer, you can easily get that just with sort of late additions and
easily, yeah. But it's going to be a different kind of bitterness, tricky though, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So it's generally going to be a little bit more of a, perceived as a softer kind of bitterness as well. Maybe not as, early additions you kind of get that more cleaner, sort of sharper bitterness, I think, don't you? Whereas because you've essentially boiled off all of the other kind of oils and volatiles and stuff, so it really is just the alpha acids that are remaining from that.
Yeah, that's why I went with first wort on mine.
Yep,
because it just seemed to be a much softer bitterness. But I mean, as I said, some hops that you cannot use with other sort of hoppy styles, you can use with this particular style of beer because it does sort of lean itself more towards different hop. I mean, specifically, I'm talking about things like Bramlin Cross, but also things like Jester, things like Olicana. For a single hopped beer, they don't really lend themselves towards having the punch to get through a 6% or a 5%er. They do with a 2.7 or 2.8%er. They really do.
Yeah.
So you can use different hops. Before we get on to Andy's beer, which you guys are currently tucking into like a pair of fat school kids, can we talk quickly about yeast choices?
Yes.
Owen, you hit us with your yeast choice, mate, because it's fucking off the wall.
Yeah, so I think ultimately, like coming back to that whole principle around body, is you're looking for low attenuating yeasts. Right. So I think we made this point earlier, actually, but just to reinforce that point. So you're really looking for yeasts that are going to finish, or attenuation rates are around 75%. It's probably a good mark. It doesn't mean to say you can't use a yeast that's going to attenuate a little higher, maybe around the 80% mark, but there's a risk that you're not going to get the same level of residual sugars in there. So I opted for a a London Ale 3 derivative. So back to Tricky's point around the kind of English brewery yeasts. In fact, it was a WHC yeast called, help me out, Tricky, Paradise something, Sunrise. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Can't remember what their version of it's called. Sorry,
but it's cool. It is basically a Conan. I think it's a Conan yeast, which is a London Ale 3 derivative. So it's going to chuck lots of nice esters, lots of nice stone fruit.
Is it saturated?
No, it's not.
I'll look it up in a Tropical second. Paradise.
Tropical Paradise. Thank you, Brooksy. That's why we have to chat.
I thought we had fucking Yeast Boy on the chat, but apparently he's not up to speed at the minute.
Is he not? I don't know the
spent too long shilling.
WHC Yeast says there's too many companies with different names for the same things nowadays.
They don't send them you for free either, do they, Trick?
No, that's the main reason.
They need to move back to White Labs doing codes, because you seem to be very good at codes.
Yeah, it's it helps when they kind of use the same code with just a different letter in front of it as well, which you used to see a bit more back in the day, but not so much now.
So I think, I think that's a great option. That's the one I used for my low ABV beer. And coming back to your point around hopping, is I didn't put anything in the boil hot side at all. I just went Whirlpool. The Whirlpool edition's going to add enough bitterness. To be fair, I generally went with a very low IBU. So I really wanted something quite tropical. As it happens, kind of came out quite dank and all the rest of it, but and then dry hopping. So yeah, what yeasts have you guys used?
I pretty much took some information from Andrew Patterson from Lalman, who came on. I wanted a low attenuating yeast that still gave a decent amount of flavor, but was also apt for the style that I was trying to produce. I was trying to go more down the pale ale kind of route. I did a completely different yeast when it came to the Pilsner Vienna kind of thing. So I ended up going with Windsor and London by Laumand, mainly because they're quite low, 69 to 70, that kind of area. And they worked really, really well for me. I ended up with my FG on version 6 being, oh God, I'm going from memory now, and that's fuzzy after all these beers. But I think it was 69 or 70%. It was somewhere around about that. It was really quite low. And I ended up with an FG of 1011 or 1012. It was round about that. Yeah. So still quite a lot of body, quite a lot of flavor, quite a lot of malt, but with a really nice hop presence as well. It was a very drinkable beer.
I think that's where mine finished, but I think mine was about 10, 12 and a half, 10, 13.
Yeah.
Which is where I kind of aim to get mine to. So I'm not sure, aside from the yeast point, which we'll come back to, Chuckies, I'm sure you probably want to talk about that, is we probably haven't emphasized the whole process piece. Are we going to do that after? We're going to do that after the commercial break.
We are. That's why the first bit
Forget I just said all of that, everyone that's listening. Tricky, you can edit that bit out. Tricky, what yeasts have you been using?
London Ale 3, like predominantly as well. I think it's again coming back to English ale yeast being more responsive to mash temp. That one does seem to respond quite well.
Definitely.
You can really push the range of gravity with that. I've not actually used it, but because that, I think probably the Verdant yeast would be a good shout as well for that same reason, because that's a London Ale mutation essentially from their brewery. I have used SO4, I think was what they gave me with the kit beer for the track table beer, I think. So at that point there wasn't really anyone doing dried versions of London Ale 3, so they gave me SO4 as an alternative. And you see a lot of stuff about SO4 sort of stalling and finishing higher anyway online, so it's probably quite
like
good.
1024.
Yeah, the classic like 1020 stall or whatever that you see people posting about. So again, that one certainly seems to be quite responsive to higher mash temperatures and just generally one that will not often stop a bit earlier anyway, I think, as a result. So yeah, it's just really the English ale yeast really. Anything sort of West Coast, they tend to be higher attenuation and not as easy to control, I think, with the mash temperatures. So things like USO5, Bry 97, California ale yeast generally would avoid those, but anything
Chico.
Yeah, anything that's like some of the, Vermont yeast and things like that, which are a little bit more, I mean, most of those are basically English ale yeast, which have
Boddington
been transferred over there. So those ones can work quite well too.
It's definitely one of those areas, the yeast choice, which, based on something that we're going to talk about after the commercial, I think we'll circle back to yeast choices. These guys have basically given it all away anyway, but there's a lot to be said for the English yeast. I've actually found, weirdly enough, that the lazy as fuck Ringwood yeast actually has some benefits when it comes to this style of beer.
Very fruity as well.
It ridiculously yeast. Lots of plum and damson flavor comes through from that one, which with a hop that obviously I love, like Bramlin Cross, works really fucking well with it. It gives you like super hedgerow, not just a little hedgerow. It's like you're stuck in this motherfucker because your mates have launched you into the top of it and you've dropped down into the middle. It's a proper like hedgerow flavor from that. I absolutely love it. Really, really nice. But if you stick with an English yeast, you generally can't go too wrong. You are on the right track.
I would agree with that. I can't really think of that many other yeasts that you're going to want to consider outside of English ale yeasts, really.
There's a couple of lager strains which tend to finish quite high if you mash quite high.
Okay.
I want to say Munich, but it might be global. Urkel doesn't. Urkel finishes.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it was global because that's pretty high attenuation.
It might be one of the Munich strains. Munich,
their Harvest one, maybe. Are you thinking
it may well be? It was an imperial strain that I had in. It might be Harvest. Harvest tends to finish and is responsive to mash temp as well.
The more sort of like Munich style lager yeast, perhaps because they're generally viewed as more malt forward, I guess, would perhaps a result of, or one of the reasons for that might be that they finish a little bit higher, give you a little bit more of that malt sweetness in the finished beer. Don't know, just sort of spitballing there, but that might be.
It definitely is one of those styles of yeast. It definitely is. Also, a weird one that you can use is WLP 820.
Okay, interesting.
Oktoberfest.
Yeah. Well, that kind of makes sense again, though, with it being more for sort of malty, more multi styles of lager. So, I mean, I think we should just. We're definitely like focusing much more on the more full bodied approach to low ABV beers, but there are particularly sort of in the more kind of European style table beer realm with your things like Pater's beer and Grisette and things like that. You're gonna have low ABV beers which are brewed and are going to have a very low finishing gravity. And I guess, you're not really going to get around that because those sorts of yeasts, Saison style yeasts and things like that, or Belgian style yeasts, are generally going to ferment it out pretty heavily, regardless of what you're doing with the temperatures, or not regardless, but they're going to be less affected by it. So we should probably we can talk about this more in the process, but we should probably just like mention that there can be other ways to, give that finished beer a bit more like mouthfeel and body, as well as just going down the gravity approach. Things like carbonation and stuff like that can also play into this, which we can talk about, I think, after the commercial breaks. Otherwise, I'm going to have drunk all of Andy's beer before we.
Right, Tricky.
We
do the commercial break intro.
Right then, I think it's about time that we take it to the commercial break.
Absolutely. Yeah, that fucking music needs to be back in, mate. It's awesome. So what are we drinking? What are we drinking? I think all of us are drinking this.
Well, we're not drinking a commercial beer, although I don't know, that new label looks.
I was going to say
it
looks like it would be good enough for a commercial bottle. The label there, very snazzy.
Yeah, check it out. High Road Hose.
Very snazzy new label.
His fucking label on a stick. I need to find somewhere to stick that. I was going to stick it on this glass, but I didn't want to waste it.
No, mate, that sticker's already gone on my firm fridge. Boom.
Yeah, man.
Along with my new Brewkeg Tap one.
So this is
you got
Andy's...
a new Brewkeg Tap logo.
A new Brewkeg Tap sticker.
Really?
Oh, sticker, not logo. Okay.
Yeah.
Andy's low ABV beer, 2.7%, and it's Mosaic and Idaho 7.
And it's called No.
With an exclamation mark. First off, I'd just like to say Andy's a lying shit. It definitely isn't 2.7%.
No, it definitely is.
It tastes like a beer that's at least 4%.
It does. It's got a lot of body to it.
A lot of body. I was like, as soon as that was the first thing that hit me, I was like, that is got some strong body for a 2.7% beer.
Yeah, definitely.
It's got a hell of a lot of malt flavor as well. I'll give it that. There is a lot of malt. I mean, I suppose if you're mashing at 72, you're going to end up with a lot of malt flavor, but I am fucking loving this beer. I'm getting like a shitload of fucking pineapple and apricot and stone fruit and peach. And I'm getting that weird kind of blueberry thing right at the back end.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Like, I'm definitely getting that blueberry mosaic note off of this. Like,
it is fucking gorgeous,
quite potently, which is that can be quite a fleeting flavor with mosaic. Although people mention it a lot, like in this beer, it's really apparent to me that it's got that blueberry thing on the
it's
finish.
Really fucking nice. I'm glad I put it in a posh glass.
He's nailed the carbonation as well. I think he's lifted that carbonation up a little bit, which I think's just adding to that body a little bit. And yeah,
it'd be nice to know what his carbonation level was, or if he even calculated it. I would put this somewhere just below kind of that lager Hefeweizen kind of range, sort of 2.6 to maybe 2.8.
I reckon about 2.8. Yeah,
I reckon this is up there with it's fucking lovely. I've been literally sitting here talking bollocks and vaping, so I didn't have to drink it all because it weren't going to last long.
Yeah, that's absolutely cracking. So Mosaic and Idaho 7, interesting combo. You don't tend to see that. I haven't probably seen that commercially, so it's a little bit of a weird combo. But
they tend to push Mosaic with Citra, though, don't they?
Well,
you don't actually see. I would say I don't think you see that many Mosaic beers, that many Mosaic commercial beers these days.
It's very expensive, though, isn't it? Mosaic is an expensive hop, no matter which way you slice it.
So is Citra, right? Although Citra, I would say probably pound for pound packs more punch than Mosaic does.
I feel like more breweries like lean on Citra as the go-to hop in combination with other things. Like, yeah, you still see lots of Citra Mosaic beers, but I think
plays so well.
Yeah, Matt from Track talked about this, didn't he, on the podcast? He said pretty much their approach to to hop combinations is like majority Citra and then like 25% of something else, or maybe two other hops at like 25%. And that was basically what they do on the majority of their beers. And he was just saying, yeah, because Citra is just Citra, and it's like super reliable, and you can just build on that with other stuff. And
it's almost like synonymous with craft.
Yeah, it's
hoppy craft beer, isn't it?
It's the craft beer flavor that most people would recognize, I think, as far as, you know.
Well, it used to be Cascade, didn't it? when everybody started out, it used to be Cascade with something else. Because
Cascade, Centennial, Amarillo, probably going into Simcoe as well. Those were the more old school. That was when it was like pale ales and IPAs that were all about like pithy grapefruit bitterness, whereas now it's much more softer, kind of tropical. You know,
I'd agree.
I'm gonna I'll let a small cat out of the bag, which I don't normally do. I like to keep them in fucking bags, but
and throw them in the river.
Yep, with bricks. But
horrible bastard.
I know. I'm a hate-filled man. If you actually go and you mix Centennial with Bramlin Cross, you end up with a fucking exceptional flavor in a low ABV beer. That's all I'm going to say. It is fucking stunning because it's berry, 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 berry in your face. It almost tastes as if you put fruit in it, especially if you get that dry hop just right. It is fucking wonderful.
Do you know that guy? You know that guy that makes like remixes videos, and I'm pretty sure like the buttery biscuit base video.
Buttery biscuit.
I really wish like someone was going to make a re-video of like berry, 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 berry.
It's fucking. It's. I have discovered.
Please, someone do that.
I've discovered that my hop sort of palate, whilst I appreciate things like the mosaics because of the blueberry and things like that, with my vaping, I'm all about citrus. I'll go down citrus every fucking day of the week and twice on Sunday. But when it comes to my beer, I want fruity berry. I want stone fruit. I want the more complex flavors because citrus to me is very much one-dimensional when it comes to beer. You get one kind of thing. It's either lime or it's grapefruit or it's orange. You know, it's very much down one line. Whereas berry can be anything from red berries to blueberries to fucking Logan berries to all these kinds of things. And it's a really, really nice flavor. And I know Santi has just decided to show up in the chat. Santiago, what's going on, bro? But I thought you were dead, by the way. It's more of a.
Not.
It's I'm definitely glad he's not. I fucking love the man, especially that beard. But if you go down that one-dimensional citrus route, you are missing out on so much of a width. Floral with berries is gorgeous. Florals with everything else is just it. Ah, fuck that meadow with a bowl of blueberries is gorgeous. Expand your hop horizons, people. Don't just fucking do Citra Mosaic all the time. And no, Brett, I never need fucking lychee because I don't want snot in my beer. Thank you.
You fucking love a lychee.
That Spectrum Incognito IPA is all Citra Mosaic. You'll love it.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, there's a lot to be said for Citra Mosaic. But I'm back
if that's your thing, crack on.
Back to Andy's beer. It's
fucking beautiful.
Stunning example of a low ABV beer. Yeah, the Mosaic's shining.
Yeah, good job, Andy.
It's straight up blueberry, man.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate this.
Gorgeous. I fucking love it. I do love it. It is amazing. Especially the name. No. Love it.
I mean, isn't it great, like, where we live in a world where Andy, who lives in Scotland, in a different country, can just put some bottles of beer in the post and they arrive at my house a few days later. And that's great, isn't it?
It's quality, man. It's good. I'm pretty pissed off actually that he's not on this podcast. I know he's ill and everything, and to be fair, that's it sucks. I hope he gets well soon. But my God, I would have loved to have drank this in front of him because I think the smile on his face would have been fucking ear to ear. It's that thing, isn't it? You make a great beer, you send it out to people, they drink it and love it, and everybody just goes, that nice big cheesy fucking Cheshire Cat grin. I love it. Yeah. So actually, speaking of beers, I've got Tricky's
message.
Yeah, speaking of shit beers, I've got Tricky Smells Lagery to drink next.
Oh, great.
Yeah, had mixed reviews.
I've heard the judges didn't like it.
Oh, mate, that's quote of the fucking day. Yeah, mixed reviews on that one. Yeah, fuck off. This is a great beer. This is a really nice beer, and the body on it took me by surprise. It's got that real sort of thick mouthfeel. It's very, very nice. Yeah, I'm fucking impressed with it. Andy, you've done well, son.
So it's a resounding thumbs up, double thumbs up for Andy's low ABV beer. Good work, sir. Good work.
I think that's
great point.
6 thumbs up.
So should we talk about some of the possible production methods that Andy might have employed in this? Well, probably definitely did employ in this beer.
I sent him the recipe. I know exactly what he employed.
Got most of the information from you for doing that.
Yeah. The first thing that you need to look at when you're producing this beer is, number one, you look at everything we've talked about previous. The next thing that you look at is your actual process. Okay, so when it comes to mash temperature, make sure that your beer for the first, I'm going to go ahead and say, the first 15 minutes of your mash does not drop below 72 degrees C. Because if it does, you're going to end up with a much thinner beer than you want. It is important to keep it at 72. You're right up at the cutting edge, the very top point, the denaturing point of those enzymes, okay? But you want to stay at 72 because you want loads of those long, complex chain sugars left over. You want the body, and Andy's beer proves it, okay?
I think people get a bit scared of venturing past 70 degrees for that reason of getting into the, denaturing of enzymes territory. But there's a bit more room up there for maneuver than most people think. I mean, you're going to start denaturing those enzymes, but it's going to be the lower temperature enzymes first, obviously, and you're still going to have, I've forgotten the actual name for them. What's the actual name for the ones that work?
You've got alpha and beta
amylase. So up into the mid 70s, even there's still going to be conversion happening. It's not going to immediately shut down your conversion of starch to sugars.
Not totally, no.
So it's not like there's this immediate bang, you've just killed all the enzymes and they're all gone as soon as you go up past 70, 2, 73, 74 even.
It's Darwinism right there.
Darwinism.
Yeah.
Darwinism.
Yeah, no, it's Darwinism. I think you find you're probably pronouncing it incorrectly.
You think?
I love you, Owen. You're ace. Yeah, I mean, you can push it as high as probably 74 and still get conversion. But with the change in the shape of the active site, and another thing which we've not actually talked about when it comes to the mash, pH is critical. Okay, if you can get your pH to 5.2, then you're gonna push the shape one way. The temperature is gonna push the shape the other. You can end up, depending on your pH, you can end up with a very different beer at this particular level of sugar than you would do in a bigger beer. Okay, so keep your pH between 5 and 5.2 is my personal preference. Your mileage may vary. Keep your temperature around about 72, 73. Mash in at 74 and just let it drop, okay? And it'll hit about 72 anyway. And then you want to leave the kind of the finishing move, the people's elbow, okay? You want that to be done by the yeast. You want the yeast to bring it down as far as it can, but you want a lower attenuative yeast, which we've already talked about, to give you a reasonable sort of starting gravity, for want of a better term, or final gravity.
Just coming back quickly to talking about pH. We mentioned before with the lower ABV beers that you're potentially going to be like sparging quite a lot just because of the lower quantity of liquid in your mash, because you've got less malt in there to begin with. So it's probably even more important than normal to be aware of like pH in your sparge water as well, particularly if you're not using RO. If you've got using tap water that's got some bicarbonate levels in it and things like that, you may want to be acidifying that sparge water just to make sure that your pH is not going up, because I think particularly with these slightly lower ABV, or it's more about the lower quantity of malt in there, essentially, and how that affects your process for sparging. You're potentially going to be encountering issues with astringency.
Definitely,
if that pH isn't right for your sparging as well as in the mash itself. So obviously a lot of that depends on your approach to water and what you're using, whether it's tap water or RO or whatever, but just be aware of that. And if you don't know what we're talking about, look into that and how it
episode 4.
Yeah,
just go back to episode 4. There's so many complex factors that are involved with making a beer with a low ABV, because you have essentially more water than you would have if you were brewing a 7%er. Okay, all of the things that you normally you can cowboy, you can get away with. Okay, you can't get away with a beer like this. And I'm going to keep going back to it because it was such a fucking fantastic point. This is a complex technical exercise when it comes to brewing these beers, and that's not to say you shouldn't do it, because if you follow the steps that we're talking about, then you can end up falling in love with the process with these low ABV. I absolutely did. So it's more of it's all about looking at what you're doing and fine-tuning every single step. 72 is decent. Just use your yeast to get down to where you want to get down to, but please do not ignore your pH. And if you don't have a pH meter, you fucking need one for these beers, right? Just the 12 quid off Amazon. Just get a pH meter, calibrate it using the powders, and then fucking use it. All right, it's not that difficult. And I understand people are struggling with money and everything right now. Buy some pH strips. They'll do the trick for you. Put a drop on. Should be able to read it off to within like half pH or 1 pH. Just make sure that you're within the range of where you need to be, because this is so easy. It's a very delicate beer. Okay, it's a delicate beer. Just be careful. That's all I'm saying. Be careful.
Be careful out there, people.
Yeah, use 2 condoms instead of just 1.
Don't do that, but do buy a pH meter.
It's probably cheaper.
Anyway.
All right, we're getting on to the boil then. We've already talked a lot about hops and hop timings and the danger of adding too much IBUs and all the rest of it. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add in terms of?
I feel like we've kind of covered most of that, to be honest.
We covered that earlier, haven't we? So let's talk a bit about fermentation and perhaps kind of.
No. There's one thing I want to cover about the timings, okay?
Okay, go nuts.
The difference between 10 minutes of adding your hops and 5 minutes of adding your hops can be 8 IBUs, depending on how many you add in, okay? Be careful with your hop. Essentially, what we're saying with the low ABV beers, and I'm going to put it in a fucking nutshell. When you've designed your recipe and Brewfather says this is what you're going to get, you can pretty much guarantee that within a range, that's what you're going to get, okay? The recipe is fine-tuning, okay? It's the difference between 150 and 152 horsepower in your car when you're fucking changing your power curve. Don't fucking off-piece this shit. If Brewfather says that you add your hops at 5 minutes and you get 8 IBUs, add them at fucking 5 minutes. Don't decide you want to go for a piss at 9 minutes and throw them in, because that might give you 12 IBUs. Follow the recipe. Follow it. Just don't go off-piste. If you go off-piste, it's going to be a problem, okay? Follow the recipe. Follow it exactly, and you will end up with a decent beer, because Brewfather is really good at whatever fucking thing that you use. Just be careful about what you do and when you add it, and add it at the right time, and you will be okay. The boil is a very simple step, but add things at the right time. Sorry.
Yes, I concur.
Yeah. Right, Chris.
Can I shut the fuck up for a minute?
Pull away from the desk, get your soapbox, slide it back under there, and we'll carry on.
I believe!
Yeah, that was well, guys. Right, follow the recipe. Yeah. So boil. We've done boil. Fermentation. Let's talk about that then. Any key points here? I think the big one, which I think fermentation carries through into packaging, is just really careful to avoid oxygen. I mean, that goes without saying. We probably talk about it in almost every podcast. Oxygen is the enemy of beer, and it is going to be a big enemy on this beer style, particularly if you go for a hoppy rather than a malt forward style. I think you probably afford to be a little less careful around a malt forward style. But what will happen is if you get oxygen onto a hop forward low ABV beer, is that oxygen will turn your hops bitter, and you will end up with a bittery, nasty mess of a beer. So again, if you much like your kind of actual beer production process, if that's not nailed, if your fermentation process isn't nailed, and you don't have a reliable process that's going to avoid oxygen, preferably you're going to be using a closed transfer process to your keg. I would avoid making a hoppy a low ABV style. There's just too much risk. It's going to pick up bitterness, and you're going to end up with a bad beer. So that's a warning label from me. What do you guys think? Do you agree? Disagree?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I've not got anything to argue with that, to be fair.
The main thing that I would say here is there is a certain amount of protection that is given to a beer with a higher ABV and with a higher protein content. You're going to have a lower protein content because you're using less malt. Okay? There is a certain amount of protection, and it's not huge, but it is noticeable. Okay? When it comes to making your normal styles of beer, the protection is going to be lower with a low ABV. You have a much higher water content. You have a much higher hop to water ratio. Okay? A much lower hop to protein ratio. And all of these things are going to affect your fermentation. And I'd just like to jump in here, guys, and I know I'm completely ignoring the script, but we've decided that as a podcast, we're going to do a giveaway. Okay? The giveaway that we're going to do, and I've spoken to Johnny at Brewkeg Tap, our sponsor. He is willing, if we cover the cost, to send out a fermenter to you guys. We're not opening the competition yet. Okay, so don't go getting excited. We want to help you guys when it comes to making these beers to the point where we are going to buy an all-rounder with a pressure kit, and we are going to raffle it off. We just want you guys to give us, we're still working out the kind of the meat and potatoes of the actual competition, but we are going to help you out. We're going to have a prize. We're going to do a competition. And if you want to brew a low ABV beer, you may want to wait a couple of weeks, maybe 4 weeks, whatever it works out to be, before you actually jump in and start doing this. But we're going to give you a closed loop fermentation session, fermenter rather, to be able to protect you whilst you're making these beers. Oxygen is the enemy of all beers, but with beers like this, it is much more of a concern.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think that's the perfect tool, a very budget-friendly, wallet-friendly tool to achieve close transfers. We did have a really good question from the chat from a guy called Robert Schoenfelder.
Yeah, Rob Schoenfelder.
He asked, "Is hop creep a concern with all the long chain sugars if you use a high dry hop rate?" And I think,
good question.
Yes,
it's a great question. So yes, and I think largely the hop creep piece comes at the temperature that you tend to dry hop. So if you dry hop at 14 to 15 degrees, if you're making an ale, is generally hop creep won't tend to be a problem. If you dry hop at 21 degrees, there is a chance that you will start to see some hop creep. But as long as you allow enough time in the sort of fermentation for that, you might end up losing at this kind of ABV level, probably a point at most.
Yeah.
If that. So I don't think it'll be big.
And it depends which hops you're dry hopping with, because certain hops cause hop creep more than other hops. So do your research on that one. I think we covered that in a podcast not too long back.
I think probably quite a while ago now.
Yeah, maybe.
Cascade, I think, is notorious for creating quite a bit of hop creep. But my recommendation again would be just to dry hop cooler to avoid not only hop creep but also hop burn.
I dry hopped when I did the Idaho 7 Cashmere version of my low ABV. I dry hopped at 6 degrees.
Nice. Yeah, I mean,
36 hours at 6 degrees was more than enough to get a lot of flavour into that beer.
Very good. Yeah, I dry hopped at 15 for 3 days.
Yeah, nobody threw a pint of my beer at me when it was dry hopped at that range. So I'm taking that as a win. Brett Simmons wants to know what day to dry hop when it's finished fermenting, mate.
Yeah.
Your mileage may vary. Okay, it may be day 4, maybe day 7. When it's finished and your hydrometer says it's finished, then dry hop.
I did find with my beer that it pretty much finished in like 48 hours.
I was going to say, if you were wanting to do like an active fermentation dry hop, it's going to be done so quick anyway that you maybe have to worry a bit less about the prolonged exposure of hops in a low ABV beer. I don't know. But,
definitely.
Something to think about. Might be a good candidate for experimenting with that, or splitting the hops and dropping some in during active and some at the end.
Yeah, definitely. Splitting your dry hop with one of these beers is actually really helpful because it can allow you to tune the dry hop during the development process to give you the flavor level that you want, because you've got to remember there's a lot less malt to balance out with the hops. So you do almost need to balance this, and your dry hop's not going to be as huge as it is normally with any other style.
I'd probably added an advanced brewer warning on that, because I think you're getting down the rabbit hole on there. Splitting dry hops, so you're adding an additional variable that, if you're going to go version to version, it's like you're talking about adding quite a lot of variables in there.
You are. And one thing that Brett talked about earlier on in the chat was he adds a gram of ascorbic acid in, as well as doing a close transfer. Now, vitamin C is good for you, mate, so don't ever turn down the vitamin C, but just be careful about how much you add, because it can add a flavour which can be unpleasant at certain levels.
Yeah, so, but good for sort of scavenging oxygen.
Very good, yeah.
Particularly, again, if you're making a hoppy style of beer. So, very good. So, are we pretty much there, guys? I think we...
Well, close transfer goes without saying.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked a bit about that, didn't we, in terms of sort of packaging and stuff. I mean,
we could mention carbonation rates as well. Again, coming back to talking about some of those European styles of table beer as well, you might see much higher carbonation to try and offset the fact that those are very dry beers as far as that end of the spectrum goes for table beer styles, and the extra carbonation is going to help to give it an impression of more body and mouthfeel, because it's actually just having that that sort of fizzy mouthfeel, for want of a better word.
Effervescent effect.
Effervescence, there we go.
I'm full of good words, mate.
To describe it.
Charlie Ticehurst has asked, is it necessary to dump the yeast before you dry hop? Fucking absolutely not. Don't bother.
No.
Give up. That's just, that's for old people. We don't do that. even though I am old. Yeah, so one thing that we do want to talk about is some great commercial examples of this. Now, I'm going to bang the fucking drum some more because Bates and Miranda are wonderful people, but also I've not had a bad beer that's come out of their brewery. So I'm going to say Duration. Their Patters beer is fantastic. Their Grisette is fantastic. Their Little Hellas is fantastic.
The Grisette would have been my one from them to suggest.
They're fucking super.
They have a hoppy table beer as well, don't they? What's that one called?
Oh God, I've probably got a can of it in the fridge right now, but I'm not going to go through them all.
I may have had it. I think their Little Hellas is excellent.
Their Little Hellas is fantastic.
As a really, really technical brew, is, not only low ABV but a lager to sort of absolutely nowhere to hide in that beer.
Yeah,
totally. It's a great beer.
That is a toughie to brew.
Keep talking, guys. I need to drain the lizard.
I'm not sure I've drunk that many other low ABV beers from that many other breweries. I know the Colonel does a table beer.
Yeah, the Colonel's table beer is really nice. It will shock you, but I'd recommend Track's table beers as well.
Yeah, of course, Sonoma, right? Yeah.
Well, Sonoma's sort of a little bit higher up the alcohol range than what we've been sort of talking about mainly on here, but they do have a regular beer they do called Toya or Tuya, which is 3%. And they've done a few sort of variations on that recipe as well recently. So they did an all Nelson kind of version of it, which I had a few cans of recently. It was absolutely amazing. Yeah, that's kind of using a lot of pretty much all of the processes that we've talked about as far as their London Ale free yeast, very high mash temperatures, lots of oats and wheat in the grist, big whirlpool and dry hop, but not really anything in the boil as far as the hopping goes. So yeah, they've generally got like a few good options available as far as sort of 3% beers. I think they sometimes do some fairly low strength sort of like sour beers as well, maybe, because that's another style that sometimes gets down into the lower percentages. So Berliner Weisses and things like that. Can't think of any.
True.
Can't think of any breweries specifically off the top of my head that are doing good examples of that, but maybe
there's a couple of Hefeweizens that I had at around about 3.3, 3.4, which are really nice as well.
Yeah.
So it all depends on the style that you want to go for, but there are really good commercial examples out there. Definitely some good ones. But look up Duration. To be fair, you won't go wrong with any of their beers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
As we keep saying, you'll find like a range of different styles in that.
Yes,
that range, that alcohol range as well. So it's not just going to be a hoppy, pale ale with a low strength. It's going to be the Grisette, your Pater's beer. They do have a hoppy version of it as well. The low strength Hellas. So and that's probably like stuff that's currently available on the website now. That's not just like over the course of the time we've been buying beers from them. So
you can tell how fucking posh Tricky is in here when he calls it a Pater's beer. Oh dear God, Pater's beer.
Pater's beer.
Yes. Lovely. Great style. Not going to diss it at all. And to be fair, winding Tricky up is just an added fucking bonus. Charlie Ticehurst has said Burning Sky's table beers.
Yeah.
Burning Sky do some good shit.
I don't think I've drunk one of their table beers, but I have certainly seen them. I tend to have a bit of an aversion to buying low ABV beers.
That does surprise me, Ho.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit of sarcasm there. Tricky.
Weird. Captain Dipper doesn't like buying low ABV beers. What a surprise.
I think my attitude's probably changing, certainly as a result of doing this podcast. But I think, sometimes I think the price point, there's not like a proportionate sliding
It's
scale
not
of
linear, is
price
it? The
point.
relationship
No,
between
it's
price
not.
and
It's not a
alcohol.
linear relationship.
When you pay $4.50 for a can at 3% and $4.50 for a can at 5%, it's like, where really?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm gonna get I want value to the pound, so I'm gonna get as much punch as I can for that pound. But I think my attitude's probably changed. I think in reality, I ought to try more table beers.
They're very good, man. And you can drive after you've had one.
That's true.
Although I wouldn't recommend driving after you've had any alcohol.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously, stay safe, people. Just don't fucking do it. Just drive where you need to drive, and then when you get home,
the description driving beer is, of course, tongue in cheek. We're not
absolutely
that is a joke.
tongue in cheek.
Driving bills don't exist. That is an oxymoron.
Actually, can I give you a very funny story of when I lived in York? Cycling after drinking is a big fucking no-no. Because I remember cycling
I don't know,
York.
with enough practice.
No, mate, there's no practice.
Like
there's no practice, because when you've had a skinful and you decide you're going to cycle home, even if you've been on the table beers and you've had 4 or 5, trust me, those red lights, they're still red. That's all I'm going to say. And bus are still hurt.
And you can still be charged by the police to,
being in charge of a vehicle. Yes,
correct. Yes,
you still will get points on your license. You can still lose your car license if you are pissed in charge of a mountain bike. Yes.
Nah, they'll never catch me.
No, they fucking will. They've got cars, mate. You're on a bike. It's one of those things. It's like it's a great thing for us to be able to make is these low ABV beers. But at the same time, the technical challenge of actually making one is bigger than you think when you first go into it. I thought mash high and it'll be fine, followed by, oh my God, where have my teeth gone? It's a complicated thing, and we hope that over this podcast, we have given you some ideas, and I will link Tricky to the Brewfather recipe that I've made for version 6, which is a solid beer. So that when this podcast actually goes live in its audio form, I will allow Tricky the recipe to click in and put in there so that we can share it with people, because you can change the hops, you can change the malt, but you want to make sure that Bootigoo is around where it is.
All right.
Nice. We nailed that one, guys. Enjoyed that.
Are we done?
Yep.
I love low ABV beers. They're ace.
Well then, I guess we wrap it up for this episode, and
let's do an after party.
Yeah.
What? Right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. It was great. Enjoy. Go forth and brew low ABV beers.
Cheers, everybody. See you on the next one.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
I enjoyed that one. Okay, so for those of you who are still on YouTube and want to join us for a chat afterwards, there is a Jitsi link which is going in right about now. I can fairly surely guarantee that Brett, the short one amongst us, is going to be the first one to that chat. Jump in there rather than you all sort of coming on and sort of trying to join video where it doesn't really work very well. The Jitsi link, jump on there, have a chat. It's one use only, so I won't even bother deleting that comment, and we can have a chat and we can have a laugh. Thanks for joining us on this one, guys.
No laughs.
It's enjoyable.
No laughs allowed.
Yeah, no, laughing is strictly it's verboten.
Verboten. What does that mean?
Forbidden.
Forbidden.
Russian verboten means smoking forbidden in German.
Are you sure it's not Darwinism?
Definitely not Darwinism. Yes.
Darwinism.
Right, we're going to stop the stream, people. Thanks, YouTube. We love you all. We'll see you in the Jitsi chat soon. I'll post a link to it in the Discord. You guys are awesome. We love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.